youth activists, representatives from various sectors, and even government ministers. And your voices will also be spotlight when we connect with you and you connect with us on social media. On Facebook, you can find us there, on Twitter, which we now know as X, on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at TTT Live Online. Has your budget wish list been satisfied? Are the fiscal measures enough? Where can we see improvement? We want to hear from you, and our guests will respond to your questions in time. As the world grapples with economic challenges and global uncertainties, Trinidad and Tobago finds itself at a crucial juncture. The country's economic trajectory raises both pause and concern amidst declining demand for commodities, fluctuating oil and gas prices, and disruptions in the global supply chain. It's against this backdrop that the finance minister recently presented the 10th national budget under the theme Steadfast and Resolute, Forging Pathways to Prosperity. As we navigate these complex economic and social landscape, today's show aims to explore the delicate balance between economic development and the well-being of Trinidad and Tobago's citizens. To this end, we are going to begin and welcome our first guest onto this evening's conversation just after the budget to address the critical issues and discuss the path forward for this resilient nation. So joining us in-house this evening, we do have with us Mr. David Walker, accountant and database consultant. We are also joined on his left in this case. We have Joel Monty Pemberton, and I have been given the ability to call him Monty this evening, the executive chairman and founder of De Novo Energy. And we also have with us to his left as well, Miss Chrisette Benjamin. We know her as a youth activist, but also as a two-time National Youth Parliamentarian for Trinidad and Tobago. And we have Kaleem Ali. And we also know him as a youth activist, but holding many other hats, which will be very insightful for tonight's conversation as well. So I do want to welcome you all to TTT here. We are going to be conducting this engaging, insightful conversation as to what just happened in our budget 2024. This is beyond the numbers, and you're joining us here live on TTT. So with that, I'm going to kick things off with you, Monty. I hope you're feeling well and you're ready to go.
Absolutely.
You know, there's so much that goes into a budget presentation, and given that lengthy presentation we've all just been through, the entire nation watching and sitting and just really looking forward to what's happened, can you give us some of your highlights for the 2025 budget presentation?
Sure. I mean, on balance, I think it appeared to be a balanced budget, knowing that it finished about 15 minutes ago. But it appears to be a fairly balanced budget. The only point that I'm not seeing, right, is from the oil and gas industry, and I guess from business planning, you have to look 10, 15, 20 years out, right? And how we're planning or repositioning Trinidad and Tobago Inc., as we call it, out, not in one-year horizons. And that future plan, what's that long-term vision, how we're going to adapt, transform, is something I would like to really explore a lot more on the panel, and yeah, especially what's happening globally.
Okay, I would also want to get your thoughts on this as well, Kaleem. Tell me, how did you feel about today's budget presentation? It literally just ended a few minutes ago.
I think I have a similar sentiment to Monty. It was a very long budget to listen to, but I think it captured the necessities of Trinidad and Tobago in our immediate circumstances. But when I think about looking ahead and really building a culture of resilience amongst our people, it doesn't really reflect that. There's no great or significant emphasis on sustainable development, climate change, the things that the world has currently put on the agenda, even at the recently concluded UN Summit of the Future, things that we've committed to. I don't see it reflected here.
Chrisette, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with Kaleem on this sentiment as well?
I share the same opinion as those who went before me, and in particular, there were some things that stood out to me in the budget. In particular, you would have recognized he mentioned a lot about collaborating with civil society, and civil society partnership is essential to address some of the social issues that we face. But according to different theorists, for example, Amata Sen, he would have accounted when we're dealing with addressing social issues, it's more than looking at economic development, you have to look at also social development. And I feel like a lot of the times we are dealing with just the symptoms of the issues and not the root causes, particularly with crime. We would have heard mentioned allocation of more police vessels, etc. But when are we going to actually tap into the actual social causes that perpetuate crime in our society. I know crime is a broad issue that is very multifaceted, has so much complex layers, but we don't necessarily focus on the social impacts, which is psychosocial intervention. I'm a huge advocate for that when it comes to youth delinquency, youth and crime. I think that's what draws youth towards crime as well.
All right, and we should have some of those figures coming up shortly as well. National security being given the third highest allocation yet again in this particular budget. So we should be able to put those figures up shortly in terms of the major fiscal allocations. But I want to draw our attention now to you, Mr. Walker. How do you feel about the presentation that we just saw?
Well, I went into the budget with certain expectations, looking at certain specific issues. And I was a little surprised and pleased. I have to say that some of the negatives that we thought might occur did not in fact occur. The suggested rise in the price of fuel, for example, did not happen, which I am assuming will please almost everybody. From a personal point of view, I was looking specifically at what was going to be offered in terms of diversification. You know, I've heard he said all the right things up front, but there was no substance to it afterwards. I am not sure that any of us here could identify the route to diversification and what this diversification is going to look like. So I believe that that is something that needs to be addressed. I hope that in the discussions we get from the ministers afterwards, we'll address that in some more detail. I was also a little concerned, tied in obliquely, if you like, with the diversification. There seems to be a continuation of this drive that we've had for decades of building more hotels, more buildings. I'm not seeing the change.
All right, interesting thoughts from each of you on our panel this evening. Right now, we want to get into those fiscal measures, and you know, it started off with adapt, innovate, and steer the course. That's the words that form the basis of the 2024-2025 budget presentation, as you now know, themed steadfast and resolute forging pathways to prosperity. And this 10th budget, presented by Minister of Finance Coleman Bird, included a number of fiscal measures that will continue to push the country's economic standing forward. We do have something from Ayana Carter. She brings us the details on what exactly transpired.
Despite a hostile economic environment between 2016 and 2019 due to global factors including geopolitical tensions, Minister of Finance Colum Imbert seemed hopeful for this country's economic future.
We not only rebounded, but our economy is stronger and more resilient now than it was before COVID-19.
Minister Imbert boasted about this country's increase in revenue despite the drastic reduction due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the severe reduction of oil and gas prices, and declining production. He said government revenue is $3.6 billion more than it was in 2019. This and increased expenditure, according to the minister, is proof of sustained economic growth. The minister noted that despite oil and gas continuing to be the major contributor to this country's revenue, more emphasis must be made into other non-energy sectors, especially over the next 2 years.
However, because oil and gas are diminishing resources and commodity prices are volatile, we must continue to support, build, and strengthen the non-energy sector, while simultaneously reinforcing the resilience and sustainability of our energy industries.
The finance minister noted that the Heritage and Stabilization Fund continues to thrive.
As of today, September 30th, 2024, our gross official reserves stand at US $5.5 billion, or 7.7 months of import cover, and the Heritage and Stabilization Fund stands at an impressive US $6.1 billion, despite substantial withdrawals during the COVID-19 period and afterwards, totaling more than US, confirming the prudent management of the fund.
In relation to property tax, an online payment solution is expected to come into effect on or before October 31st.
Cognizant of lingering issues with some valuations, We have also extended the deadline for the Board of Inland Revenue to issue notices of assessment for property tax to October 31st, 2024. This extension will allow the Valuation Division additional time to finalize the assessment of annual rental value and address any adjustments necessary. It also afforded the Board of Inland Revenue additional time to issue notices of assessment to residential property owners and occupiers.
Ayana Carter, TTT News.
So we're taking a look at some of those fiscal allocations, the major allocations. I do believe that we have that graphic now that we can put up for you all as well, so that we can get a sense of how this budget was actually broken down. And we're looking at that $54.224 billion fiscal allocation that we're seeing here. In terms of where there's that lion share that we've been hearing about all afternoon, health, of course, getting that lion share of $7.571 billion. Second is education and training, $7.512 billion. And then we have national security, quite similar to what was seen the last few years. What are your thoughts? And I'm going to start with you, Monty, on this. In terms of, do you think that the allocations are in the right places?
Broadly speaking, yes, because you need to have a healthy population. That's one. And what is very exciting to see is the number of policies being put in place for preventative care. You saw the donation by Phoenix Park. You saw emphasis on cancer screening and so on. So I think that's going to be very important to hopefully reduce the cost in the future, because if we don't actually take care of that, the cost will balloon. We do have an aging population, and as such, that healthcare bill could actually balloon much bigger in the future, which could be a serious burden on society. So very happy to see emphasis on preventative care, preventative maintenance, those sort of things. In terms of, and I guess more will always be better, so you don't expect more preventative care. In terms of education, I think one of the key things is, as you said, every year they put a big chunk towards education, but I'm not seeing we're doing the same thing over and over again. And we're seeing globally a whole switch, a whole change in how kids are being educated. What are the skills for the future? What is stem cell? I have two young sons, and they're like, are we going to use this in school? Are you going to use this in life later on? That's a battle with my 10-year-old son at 10.
Right.
So how are we really going to revamp the education system to give the youths the skills required, again, for 10, 15, 20 years out? It's not criticizing the old system, but the old system is not going to take us to where we need to go. And that transformation, I think, is not happening as fast as we need to. And that institutional strengthening to deliver that is something that's going to become very critical. If not, we will be left behind. We're seeing where throughout Europe, even within the Caribbean, you're seeing drastic changes in how actually kids are being educated and so on. You could look at China, for example, the emphasis on STEM, on mathematics, engineering, so those are things that we have to watch very carefully. I think we are a bit behind the 8th ball, and tying into that would be the social impact of how you actually teach these young kids social skills, try to alleviate crime and those sort of things. So I think whilst we spend a lot of money there, what is the impact, and are we really preparing for the next generation who will have to take care of the aging population, by the way?
Well, I see Chrisette and Kalim both nodding their heads in agreement right now. So you're looking at that youth factor as well. Do you think that it is affecting this particular sector, this group of people? Are they better off or are they worse off considering the budget allocations today? Chrisette or Kalim, any of you can go first.
Okay, so when it comes to education and training, as you rightfully said, you're seeing the same amount of allocations and the same thing being done over and over. In particular, when I think about education, I think there's an assessment on the country in terms of the challenges we face. That document was produced by Ministry of Planning, I think, since 2020, and it acknowledges that our education system is not producing innovators, entrepreneurs. So when are we going to address those key issues? Furthermore, I came across a joint select committee report when it comes to health. That's another point I wanted to bring up on mental health, and it acknowledges that there is a knowledge gap. Like, there isn't a pool of enough mental health nurses. There's not a pool of enough psychologists. So when it comes to the GATE program, why aren't we funding post-grad education in these fields, provide the specialists? Because I think other joint select committee reports reveal where we have knowledge gaps in this country, but yet still we have a lot of young people that are doing certain degrees in areas that this field is saturated already. So we really need to rethink the way that we're going about in terms of educating young persons. The fields, we're talking about digital transformation. We need to incorporate that even as low as the preschool level, primary school level, get that population, the children and the youth really into digital transformation, digital education, digital access, understanding that at this age.
You know, we will be joined later on by the Minister of Public Administration. So we will try to get some of those questions. I know it's a bit burning for everyone, that issue of digitalization and digitization itself and how we go about that. Is it being done the right way? So we shall be addressing that later when the Minister shows up. But Kaleem, I notice you've gone a little quiet. What's your thoughts on the allocations?
I think when you look at the allocations on a surface level, they look good, because these are the areas that we need to be invested in. But when you actually look at where that money translates, that's where the question of, okay, are these investments, or are we just putting money back into the same thing over and over and possibly expecting a different outcome? And then that also begs the question of, one of the words that you started off this conversation with, and that was mentioned in this budget statement, was innovation. And such a large percentage of the money that is allocated is spent on recurrent expenditure. So in reality, you have to ask yourself, how much money is left to actually innovate? And how much money do we have left to progress Trinidad and Tobago? Because what we do is we continue to maintain an existing system and pump money into the same programs and expect different outcomes without really being innovative or thinking of ways to improve, enhance, or where necessary, remove programs that are not functioning. I do want to note that in this budget, compared to last year's budget, the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service did get a sizable increase. And I have to give that ministry a plug in terms of, in comparison to a lot of the other ministries, they get a much smaller allocation, but they've done so much work with that allocation. But it also does make me beg the question of, okay, if that ministry could use constrained resources and have that big of an impact, what are the other ministries that are getting higher allocations doing with their money? And where do we see the level of impact that we would like to see? And then, in terms of looking at these figures, I just want to point out as well that it brings up a question. I hope this is a conversation we explore later on in terms of the process of budgeting in Trinidad and Tobago. We had to sit until almost the end to get those figures. And so after approximately, 5 hours and some minutes of hearing, most of the conversation beyond where we were, and now coming to the end of where we are going, the budget really is supposed to tell us where we are going. And the average citizen who's tuning in and listening in, by the time we get to the where are we going, they've tuned out. And they in that, they've essentially been excluded from this entire process of budgeting, because all they're hearing is the same talking points from last year with some additions, things that we've heard in the media, we've heard in the news. They are more concerned with how does this budget directly affect me in the now and in the potential future. And so I really do hope that as a conversation we go more in depth on the way in which we budget and present this budget, but
well, we're hoping that we do get some sense of the process of the budgeting system and how it works and how it filters down to not just the poor and the rich, but everybody in between, the collective Trinidad and Tobago. Now, David, I left you for last because what I wanted to find out from you in particular with this allocation, we see that Tobago would have gotten $2.599 billion. And that is an increase from last year's $2.585 billion. So it's the largest allocation that Tobago has gotten within the last few years.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Before I go into that, let me just pick up on what my colleague here said, because it's a point that I have tried to make repeatedly in the past. We spend so much time looking at how much money each ministry has gotten, and so little time on what they do with that money once they've gotten it. We need, as a nation, as planners, as people who execute, to spend more time really addressing what is done and what is achieved with that money. Are we spending it well? The reality is, if we look at the deliverables, say roads, etc., the answer is that it's not being spent well. And there are many of us who are of the view that huge gains are there to be made without a great deal of work, without actually spending more money. So I just wanted to get that in first of all, because I think it is critically important. With respect to Tobago, my own view, my own view as somebody who has been working in Tobago quite a lot and who has roots in Tobago, I do feel I'm going to make a few enemies in Tobago because of what I'm about to say, but I do believe we have enough money that, if used properly, allows Tobago to develop. I think Tobago has tremendous potential. The classic one is tourism, but Tobago has a lot more going for it. It's got, the maritime industries, the fishing, the scuba diving, etc. We've got some of the best aggregate on the planet, and we've got markets for it. We have the potential to develop Tobago on the basis, I believe, my view, of the allocation that we've got, if only we spend the money properly. Now, there's a broader context I want to put that into, which is that there have been studies done globally as to the amount of money that's lost by governments through corruption and incompetence. And across the spectrum, the range that the researchers have come up with is that it's between 10% and 50%, depending on the country you're in. So if a bit of time and energy and thought is put into addressing that, it alleviates a lot of the issue. We're trying to find more money. I believe we have enough money, to put it simply, in order to achieve what I imagine most of us would want, not just for Tobago, but for Trinidad as well. But we need to address how we spend that money. And there are some issues that I would want to raise in that context, but for now, at a high level, let us agree to examine how that money is spent and how it is used.
All right, so there seems to be a consensus in the room that the allocations are similar. It's familiar with what we've seen over the last few years. It doesn't feel as though there is alignment with developmental goals in the room at the moment, and the high priority sectors remain the high priority sectors to those influencing the budget. That's the sense that I'm getting from you all with respect to key investment areas this year. So we will be continuing our conversation. We do want to take a look at what's happening with that lion's share factor, that health sector that has gotten the largest portion of the pie, if we can say that, for this year's budget. But we shall do that when we come back from a quick break. So this is Beyond the Numbers right here on TTT. We're taking a short break and coming back with more.
Yeah, mussels, not mussels, I have thought.
Extremely gourmet food here by NTK. I'm gonna get that scallop. Kind of like feels like a scallop with some bread pudding and definitely some green seasoning. Oh yeah, and there's a lot more food to come.
कजरा मोहब्बत वाला अखियों में ऐसा डाला कजरे न ले
Well, we are back. This is Beyond the Numbers right here on TTT, and we are having a conversation about the budget presentation, budget for fiscal year 2025. So we're not debating, guys. We are here to have a simple chat, try and figure out what is the process. Were things working out in this budget for many of us? Does it align with our developmental goals? And how does it influence, what influences the projection? So what we want to do right now is go into one of those allocations, those areas that would have gotten the biggest share. The Ministry of Health, as we've seen recently, got the lion's share of the budgetary allowance for 2025 at a total of $7.571 billion. Finance Minister Colman Burt said the government is committed to investing heavily in public health. He said the strategy focuses on prevention, early detection, and treatment. So here's Karen Cozier-Phillip with this report.
During his budget presentation, the finance minister noted close to $600 million was spent by the government under the External Patient Care Program. Hundreds of millions of dollars was also spent through the Chronic Disease Assistance Program, CDAP.
A total of $721 million spent on pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals, and $185 million was expended on medical equipment upgrades. In addition, Madam Speaker, over 265,000 persons benefited from CDAP at a cost of $190 million over the period 2021 to 2024. Hundreds of millions more were spent on the treatment of diabetes, hypertension, and cancer.
To combat the proliferation of cancer in Trinidad and Tobago, the government will also be implementing several programs.
Currently enhancing the lung cancer clinic through the procurement of equipment that will be capable of providing advanced diagnostic and treatment services for lung cancer patients. The first two phases of this project have already been completed, and it is estimated the entire project will cost $27 million. Currently, there are over 10,000 individuals in our nation who are living with various forms of cancer, with prostate cancer being the most common among men and breast cancer the most prevalent among women.
The finance minister also listed various infrastructure projects, some of which were completed during the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
We have now completed the 150-bed Arima Hospital at a cost of $1.6 billion, the 100-bed Point Fortin Hospital at a cost of $1.3 billion, and the Roxborough Hospital at a cost of $133 million. The new $1.1 billion Sangre Grande Hospital was opened early this year, and it serves over 155,000 persons. The 540-bed Port of Spain General Hospital Central Block is currently at 60% completion. Drive down Charlotte Street, you'll see it yourself. On completion, it will allow the growth of other clinical services, surgical, pharmaceutical, and laboratory services, diagnostic and treatment, as well as the expansion of some existing services such as ophthalmology, ear, nose, and throat, and pediatrics. The project is scheduled for opening in March of 2025.
Karen Cozier-Phillip, TTT News.
So we're talking about that health sector, again, the term lion's share being taken around, being used, spoken about. I know, Chris, that you are looking at that mental health factor. We were discussing it during the break for a very short time. Tell me, what are your thoughts on that now?
Well, first to begin with, I didn't hear anything in regards to mental health. I think previously, as a previous interview I'd done years ago, I think only 0.4% of health budgets are allocated to that mental health, initiatives addressing mental health. But yet still, the Joint Select Committee report that I referenced before on mental health says that 25% of the population has a lifetime prevalence of mental issues. So that translates to 325,000 persons. And yet still the report found that there is underreporting and low diagnosing of mental illnesses within our population. And it actually puts forward recommendations to start as low as early childhood level, including training programs such as play therapy, child therapy, etc. So it's like we have the answers, but yet still we are not seeing the focus and the political will to address these issues. And I think mental health even translates into other social issues, such as even crime and violence, and we see that happen all the time. So I think if we tackle some of these issues, then we would actually not need to spend so much money on other social issues because they're very interconnected.
Interesting. Kaleem, you're shaking your head. What's your thoughts on that?
I think in terms of health getting the biggest allocation, it boils down simply to health is wealth. And so without a healthy population, we really don't have, we can't chart a course for sustainable development in Trinidad and Tobago. But when we discuss healthcare, the emphasis or the focus tends to be on reactive approaches to healthcare. So when you get sick, how do we go from there, as opposed to taking preventative measures? And I know other ministries work in that realm, particularly sports and community development, on promoting a culture of exercise and whatnot, but we really need to have preventative measures be cross-cutting and taking an intersectional approach across all ministries, not just, not just the ministries of health because it's their mandate. And looking at that, we have to ask ourselves some of the important questions, and reevaluate, for example, our food import bill, but not just looking at the food that we are importing, but what is in that food that we are importing and allowing into the diets of our citizens. We have to look at the kind of food that citizens have access to. When you look at what is accessible and what is cheap versus what is healthy and what actually promotes and protects health. So those are the types of things that we need to evaluate. We need to get a culture of moving. So many people within our workforce sit at a desk for so many hours, and that in and of itself contributes significantly to the development of lifestyle diseases, which we then have to treat later on with medication and interventive healthcare, as opposed to taking a preventative approach. So I really would have hoped to see some more conversation on that. However, I do have to go back and read that statement when it becomes publicly available. In the event I did miss that part of the conversation.
All right, interesting. And you're talking about your health is your wealth. We saw, because this can go two ways now. Let's focus on that wealth factor, minimum wage. It's something that a lot of people would have been looking forward to at the very end of that budget presentation, being raised from $20.50 now to $22.50 per hour. And we know that this is their way of stimulating the economy. You're having more consumer spending, businesses benefiting from this as well. So, Monty, what's your thoughts on this?
So I believe the increase in the minimum wage is only for the public service. I'm not sure it's not a general increase in wages. I think that it's fair. I think public servants are actually underpaid, quite frankly, for the work that they put out. So I think that is fair and that's acceptable in my view. One could argue that more could be done or the output could be more, and there should be more institutional strengthening. I think should be a focus for a lot of the institutions. And I want to come back to health and education because I see this hand in hand. So in the budget, from what I heard, there's a lot of emphasis on the preventative health. But what you need to see is tie that into education, right? Because a lot of folks don't read labels. Sugar is the enemy. And I believe, we all love sugar, but it is the enemy, right?
Yes.
But in reality, it's how do you educate the population to understand why is it the enemy? How do you manage that? From my friends who are doctors, we have one of the highest per capita rates of diabetes and cancer, certainly in the Caribbean region. And that really comes down to sugar, and not exercising and so on. So how do you educate at a very young age? How do you tie that in? Because it's linked to productivity as well. Mm-hmm. So the sicker you are, you have a sick workforce, you can't produce a lot more, and that could erode with competitiveness. So it ties straight back into wealth sustainability from a longer term perspective. Again, we have an aging population. We have a high per capita rate of diabetes and cancer and other those types of diseases. How are we going to cure that? Because the younger population is going to have to basically create the wealth to take care of the older population, and it could become quite cyclical. So how do we sort of tackle that problem? And one of the things is it's also diversity of thought and how we deal with these challenges. There's an element of, this is how we did it in the past and it has worked. But I think increasing that diversity of thought in the room, where there's the youth, where there's just different perspectives, right? It'll be good, bad, you could argue. But I think once you have that diversity of thought, you're going to come up with better solutions, right? And that's going to be important. And that's what we like to say a bit more of, basically.
Right. Now, I know we were also discussing during our break that we see health and digitization going hand in hand at this stage as we're moving away from that cashless, paperless system, and the health sector now benefiting from a system that moves into the digital ecosystem. So, David, we were discussing that this is a topic that you clearly want to address this evening for us. How do you see that working out in terms of the progress from last year's fiscal year, but the budget allocation that was given there, and what we're seeing now with how much money is going into that? How does that factor in with the digitalization of the entire healthcare system?
Well, let me start by describing the frustration that I have felt for the last few years. Because of COVID, a large percentage of the population went into health centers and hospitals and so on and volunteered their medical data, what comorbidities they had, etc., etc. We put them on pieces of paper and then shoved them in a cupboard. That is about as valuable information as a health ministry could seek to have. And in the normal course of events, you couldn't flog people to get them to go and give up that information. And there we were, handed all that information, and we simply ignored it and put it to one side. Even within the COVID environment itself, if somebody got their first vaccine, say in San Fernando, and turned up for their second one in Tobago, the two things were completely unrelated. The people in Tobago had no knowledge of what happened previously in San Fernando. They had to rely on the patient to tell them, if the patient chose so to do. That information, if gathered together, if made available in a consolidated manner so that no matter which institution you go into, they had access to that information, it could enhance greatly the care that is given to that person. It could also greatly assist decision makers at policy level. Because, we talk a lot about how many people suffer with diabetes, how many people suffer with other things, but we're just basing it on estimates. We were given the opportunity to gather significant data. And I really struggle to understand why that data wasn't captured into one centrally located database that everybody could gain access to. And we go forward and build a system on the back of that data that we already have.
So you feel then that there is some disconnect between the ministries in how they are communicating with how this digitization is going to work?
I do feel so. Now, people often tell me that I am a bit radical in some of the ideas that I put forward. I think we've gotten to the point where the powers that be, possibly the Prime Minister, needs to say, as the Chief Justice has done, we're not going back. We were forced to do things in a way that we see has improved the performance. Not only are we not going back, but we're going to build on what we have started. And I see it particularly in the health sector with what happened with COVID, that it gave us an opportunity. And I feel confident that had we done that with COVID, that other ministries, other departments, other divisions would see the benefit of what I call level 1 digitization. I'm not talking here digitalization. That's the grand system that costs you millions of dollars. I'm talking level 1 digitization. You have something that's put on a form now and goes into a filing cabinet. Simply transpose that and make it universally available to authorized personnel so that you could get a global picture of the country. So it presents opportunities, and it also will present incentives for people to start to think differently about all the systems the manual systems that we have, and how we could use digitization at level 1 to improve the decision making and also the day-to-day operations of the organization.
Well, we are going to be joined very shortly by the Minister of Public Administration, so we should be able to get a sense of how this system actually works. What is the progress report on digitalization and getting toward a digital economy or ecosystem here in Trinidad and Tobago? And we do want to find out as well, what new initiatives people can expect. So we are going to take a quick break and come back with much more. This is Beyond the Numbers here for Budget 2025. We'll join you shortly.
The winning numbers in the National Lottery online draws for Monday, 30th September 2024. At 10:30 a.m., play away the number 18 Waterboat, 2 mega bonus balls called. Pick 2 the numbers 17 and 11 in that order. Pick 4 the numbers 8, 1, 9 and 9 in that order. At 1 p.m., play away the number 3 Carriage, mega ball called. Pick 2 the numbers 2 and 22 in that order, mega ball called. Pick 4 the numbers 4, 3, 1 and 8 in that order. At 4 p.m., play away the number 23 House. Pick 2 the numbers 34 and 6 in that order. Pick 4 the numbers 5, 0, 5 and 6 in that order. And at 7 p.m., play away the number 15 Sick Woman, Mega Extreme Ball called. Pick 2 the numbers 16 and 35 in that order, Mega Ball called. Pick 4 the numbers 7, 8, 1 and 7 in that order. Cashpot, the numbers 2, 8, 15, 20 and 14 in any order, and the multiplier is 2.
So we're now standing on the bank of the Marianne River right here in Blanchisseuse, and we're now making our way to Avocat. As you can see, we have a lot of gear with us, and we're actually preparing to rappel this amazing waterfall.
Welcome back. This is Beyond the Numbers right here on TTT. So I'm Seigonie Mohammed, and if you're now joining us, we are having a conversation on the budget presentation for 2025, the fiscal year. So we are now joined by, I want to say the Honorable, but we are now joined by the Minister of Public Administration, Senator Alison West. And we know her as formerly being in the Ministry of Finance as a minister within that ministry since 2017, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Right. And then also you were formerly in the position of administration and digital transformation.
Correct,
And
yes.
digitization or the digital economy has been a big topic here for us this evening. And we are also joined as well by none other at this time than Mr. Rushton Parry, the MP for Mayaro. I know you are also a local business owner, correct? Right. So we are going to be having interesting conversations here this evening. So Alison, I want to get right down to it. You know, we've been trying to figure out what is the process behind the budget presentation. We know what goes into the budget, but the process thereafter, the accountability factor. Can you explain what happens after the budget is read for Trinidad and Tobago?
After the budget is read and the debate takes place, so that we arrive at a final position, then the ministries are responsible for assuming responsibility for treating with their various programs, overseen by the Ministry of Planning and Development, which is supposed to monitor the rates of development, how they're going, whether they need any assistance in terms of getting things done, so that we can try to get to the delivery of all that we promised to the population.
Talking about all that has been promised, I want to bring in Mr. Parry here for a quick minute. What are your key highlights from the budget presentation that was just delivered within the last hour or so?
Well, one of the expectations that I came into the budget listening for was that the fact that the Minister of Finance would have had to come ready, understanding that he's coming in from the 2023-2024 fiscal system with a huge deficit. He would have come in knowing that there has been some increase in spending in terms of public sector wages. He would have come in knowing that there has been some increase in spending in the social sector network as well. Knowing this is an election year that is coming, do you want to go down the trap of being accused of being, looking at an election budget? I think the minister prevented that. I thought that understanding that he's constrained with a $70, $75 oil price, constrained with, not being able to have the bandwidth that he would need. I think he was very, the word I don't want to use is cautious in what were some of the plans. So taking that into consideration, I would have thought that there are 4 or 5 main issues affecting this country today. The crime situation, issue of foreign direct investment, foreign exchange availability, infrastructure issues. One would have thought that part of the policy program of the government going into this fiscal year would be to address some of those things. Now, perhaps when the ministers come in the debate, they may elaborate more in the specific ministries. But, as a budget presentation, you want to be inspirational, you want to be innovative, you want to tell the population, listen, the Prime Minister came and said, listen, tough times ahead, 2027, brace for some tough time. His job was to untough it. I do not believe that in the presentation after 5 hours and some change, that he would have untoughed it. I think there was no conversation around the issue of diversification. We've been singing that song for 9 years. One would have thought that, we have to look more at how we use digital transformation in all sectors to improve efficiency. How do we use our geographic location 2 degrees below the hurricane belt? How do you use our maritime sector in a positive way to drive foreign exchange? How are we going to use our trade and investment in places like Guyana and so on in terms of getting access to the available business? Those things were missing from the budget. So I'm really hoping as the debate continues, some of those things may be hidden in the periphery in terms of what the minister's plan was. And we look forward to see how that unfolds.
Well, I know that is a sentiment that David also echoed just a little while earlier when we kicked off our segment this evening. And, the digital economy has been well represented in the 2024 budget. In 2025 now, we're seeing that it is being seen as a critical sector for funding yet again. So what we have now is that there is a sense of a thrust towards Trinidad and Tobago becoming a cashless society sooner rather than later. And this is according to the Minister of Finance, Colman Bird, during, as you all would have just heard, that 2024-2025 national budget presentation in the House of Representatives on Monday today. So let's hear a little bit more as to what that entails.
Finance Minister Colm Imbert said India engages in $300 billion cashless transactions daily. Thus, the justification as to why the timing is right for Trinidad and Tobago to embrace digital transactions. However, he criticized the opposition for their stance regarding cashless transactions, calling it short-sighted.
The resistance to this very progressive development by the opposition is indeed, unfortunately, myopic. Any person who irrationally opposes cashless transactions on the spurious grounds that it will allow the government to know your personal business when it is common knowledge that all such electronic transactions are encrypted is stuck in the Stone Age.
The finance minister also weighed in on the International Financial Centre and the strides they have made so far in drafting policies towards a cashless society.
The International Financial Centre has completed the National Financial Inclusion Survey report. That survey revealed that 25% of the population lacks access to basic financial accounts, significantly impacting their financial resilience. Additionally, 77% of micro, small and medium enterprises lack business bank accounts.
Additionally, the minister announced that 150 firms will receive technological support to enhance their operations, all in an effort towards a digital economy, as well as the implementation of a national EID, which will digitize social grants.
National EID will allow beneficiaries to easily apply for and monitor the status of their social benefits from the comfort of their homes. The National EID is a primary enabler of digital access and inclusion.
And with respect to the national e-commerce strategy, Minister Imbert indicated it will be completed by December 2024. He's hopeful this strategic plan will address gaps within the e-commerce landscape. Charlene Lewis, TTT News.
Well, with that said, we have been seeing that within the other fiscal measures that the digital economy there's a lot going into this particular sector, 5 million being pumped into the National Digital Literacy Project. We also have a significant amount of money being pushed into the Digital Literacy Certificate for students as well, $2.9 million. So, Ms. West, we're talking about this digital economy. What can people expect to see going forward, considering the amount of money that is surrounding this particular allocation? What new initiatives can they look forward to?
Okay, there's a lot going on in the digital sphere. We have a Ministry of Digital Transformation charged with the responsibility mainly of creating a unique ID so that we can provide a better, more rounded, more proactive services to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and operational interoperability of the public service. So they are focused on that. All other ministries, including the Ministry of Health, are digitizing their services. So I listened to Mr. Williams, is it? Walker, sorry, talking earlier about us not taking advantage of the information gathered during COVID. I can tell you, as part of the then Ministry of Public Administration and Digital Transformation, we did start the process of digitalizing those records, and that is continuing. Unfortunately, it can't happen overnight because we're talking thousands and thousands of pages of documents that we have to do, but we are heading in the right direction. You are seeing the results coming out of certain ministries that have jumped ahead, like the AG's office, the Ministry of Works in terms of Transport Division. So there is an impact that is happening throughout the service in terms of digitalization, and that will be reflected in the level of service provided to the public.
Okay, so Chris, I want to bring you in here because from the youth perspective, digital is the way to go. Everyone is looking at card versus cash and moving into that more than beyond 21st century type of movement with financial services. What's your take on this particular sector now being seen as critical?
So I love the ideas and the plans that I heard today. Definitely a cashless society is the way to go. Particularly me, I work from home. I don't like to leave my house sometimes. And, leaving to go and pay a bill sometimes would cost the citizen money to leave. So I really like the direction that we're heading. But young people are particularly interested in work from home policies. In particular, ECLAC would have revealed a report where the average citizen spends 33 days for the year in traffic, and time is money. It costs I think it came up to a cost of $2.2 billion. So a lot of young people are interested in knowing what is the update on the work from home policy, because one, there's so much benefits. You have a happier population. The assessment on the country that I spoke about before that the Ministry of Planning would have found, we have a problem with our culture in the public service where the productivity level is low. I can attest that working from home would boost productivity. So young people are truly interested in that, especially when the purchasing power of the average citizen. I'm originally from Rio Claro, South Trinidad, and I know a lot of people that work in Port of Spain. If you calculate the average cost for them to get to Port of Spain, and let's just say they have a salary of $5,000 or $6,000, that's almost $1,200 a month they're spending just to travel to work. So work from home policy would save them that. So if there's any updates on that, what we could look forward to in terms of working from home.
Oh, Mr. Parry, I know that you are a local business owner. So hearing that sentiment from a member of the youthful community, I consider myself part of that as well. And knowing that the government is investing in having our citizens gain digital training, how does that factor into the business community now?
So, Chrisette is my constituent, so I share the same view in terms of being able to work closer from home. Rather than having to take this cost to get into Port of Spain and San Fernando. The work from home policy is very, very important. It's something that I thought we regressed a bit after COVID. I think there was a lot of gain in terms of using some work from home procedures. But when we looked at what was happening in the United States, there was an argument that we need to bring people back out to work for one reason. There was the requirement of protecting the real estate market. Because when you look, if you push people back home to work, what happens to these billions of dollars of assets in buildings? And that's why you find in the US, some of the big players like Facebook, Google, they instructed employees to come back into the buildings to work. In terms of the work from home as well, we look at the decentralization, bringing back work into the municipalities and so on. Now, to me, I have looked at it as a businessman, as an MP for the area as well. If I can stop Chrisette and the other 200 young people who have to travel to Port of Spain or to Chaguanas to work, we can bring them back into your municipalities. We can solve a lot of issues in terms of family problems, the anger on the road, 4 hours getting, we talk about mental health. That's a huge issue in terms of our workforce because you're spending 3 hours to get to work. You get to a building, and with the greatest respect to the minister, we still have a lot of public buildings. You reach to work critical anymore, the AC is not working, the toilet's not flushing. You hear about that all the time. And then, so you're already frustrated from that drive. You get there, and then, you have a member of the public come and they say something off key, and then there's the perception that, public officers are rude and this and that and the other. So I think, work from home, from that perspective, the ability to decentralize into your municipalities, those are the things I felt we ought to be addressing, really at the policy level going into 25, 26, 27, and how would we make the life of the citizen better? And with the issue of the cashless society, I've always wondered, as banks become more digital, why isn't the cost for services going down, right? One of the problems we find here in Trinidad and Tobago is we're not a trusting society. I trust the money in my pocket, right? It's because of how we've grown up. So we feel that when we put this information outside there, there's the perception that because I can be tracked when I swipe my cards, my business, right? And we have a culture of the way we do things in Trinidad and Tobago. So listening that the minister has put some money in terms of training and sensitization. Now, I don't know if that is enough. I think we need to do a lot more than that.
When you say we need to do more than that, what exactly do you mean? What more do we need?
Well, we need to push more in terms of sensitization, the public, in terms of the benefit of digitalization. You know, there are some people in my area I know do not know how to use their ATM cards. They are afraid to go into an ATM machine. You know, that is the kind of fear that some people have, especially that middle-aged, older folk. They rather go to the bank and stand up and wait and collect the cash in their hand for that $3,500 for their pensions rather than get it in a card and be able to go to the supermarket and swipe. They feel somebody in the household could take up the card and go and spend the money. So it comes back down to a whole trusting issue. When you look at the speed at which the digital transformation is happening, I am not happy that we've moved fast enough, but I also understand the challenges you have in the government service, in the public service, with the regulations, the law, what you can do. You have the unions coming in terms of what is fair, what is not fair. So I know it's a task for any government in terms of how do you create a very modern public service. It's a work in progress, but I think we need to be going faster because we are getting way, way, way behind the eight ball. If you saw this week, Barbados has launched an AI strategic programs in their school, right? So they are using the technology, you know, they are using their internet systems for, you know, they call it the nomad system where you can come get a visa for 6-8 months, come and work remotely in Barbados from anywhere in the world. So I think we're getting left behind. And I think the state, the policy of the state must be a little more aggressive. And I think we need to start throwing some people into the deep end. Get it done, and you're forced to learn it as well. Because this piecemeal approach that we're being thrown behind the eight ball, we will end up lagging too far behind.
Well, I see Alison
You get to jump in.
Jump in. Go right ahead.
Because we have a different approach to Barbados does not mean we're being left behind, okay? So that MP Parade talked earlier about he hasn't said anything about diversification. The minister mentioned so many projects that promote our diversification program. There is the tourism thing in Tobago, there's the marina, there's the digital hub, which is training young people to get into digital businesses so that we export services rather than import people. The issue of the mental health and the fact that it's not being tackled from schools, it is being tackled from schools. The schools have now a health contingent of people and another contingent of people dealing with learning issues and so on to identify problems early so that they know how to escalate those problems if it is needed. So there are tons of things going on, and I will admit that this government is not as good as it should be in telling people what we are about, but we are doing all sorts of things. So when we talk now about the work from home program, because I know there's a big interest in that, yes, we were forced to go there during COVID, but that doesn't mean we were ready to go there. So we had to pull back and say, let us do an assessment of what is required, are we ready, what is needed, because what we cannot afford to do is to go to work from home and further deteriorate the level of service in the public service. So we are trying to avoid that at all costs. So we are now looking to see who is ready, how are we ready, who qualifies, what do we need. We are going to soon launch a pilot project, and then once that is successful, we will roll it out throughout the public service. So I don't have to be sold on the benefits of working from home. I know what they are. I'm looking forward to things like less traffic on the road because not too many people are moving from Point Fortune from 3 o'clock in the morning to come to the office. But we need to introduce it responsibly because one of the things you have to remember is that our public servants are not used to managing remotely. So although the younger members of the workforce may be ready and eager to go, the older members who are managing them wouldn't know where to start. So we have to put things in place to ensure that everything does not fall down. So that by the beginning of next year, we should have come to a landing on whether we can properly and responsibly introduce a work from home. And then once we ascertain that, we will move ahead with it.
Minister, just one intervention. I think
yes.
what we ought to be also doing is start practicing task-based management rather than hourly-based management. I think that's where the challenge
That is the switch that we have to make. But that is not something you can tell somebody who has been inculcated in the old culture to just change. So while we are looking at the work from home policy, we are trying to inculcate that into the new approach going forward.
So we do have some very interesting conversation coming out of the digital economy, the digital ecosystem. David, I want to bring you back in here. We have a few minutes left before we wrap this particular topic. What are your thoughts hearing from the minister? And I mean, I've been seeing some heads nodding at what was being said as well. Are you in agreement with what is being said?
I'm in partial agreement. It's a large part of agreement, yeah. But on the edges, I do have a couple issues. The first is this. It is important to understand that if we are going to try to get people to embrace digitization, we have to meet them where they are. They have their reasons. We can't just assume that this person is maybe uneducated or, let me use an old-fashioned term, a country bookie, and therefore won't digitize. We have to understand where people are. That's been the case all the way through. Remember, I've been involved in this since the early 80s. I was involved in digitizing companies in the UK since about 86. And at every stage along the way, with every new advance, it has taken time to get the public on board. And some people saw it as people being, not willing to adapt. The successful companies decided that they had to understand the rationale of the person who doesn't want to get on board. And then they were better able to craft solutions that would bring them on board willingly, so you don't have to be constantly cajoling or trying to force them. The other issue I would raise very, very quickly, and it's a big issue, but I'll just summarize it, is that many countries now are following the Estonia model, and they're buying systems from Estonia and following Estonia. I wish they would understand what really happened in Estonia. Estonia came out of the old Soviet Union. They were impoverished beyond anything I could describe here. And this was in the early 90s, and they decided they wanted to digitize and become more efficient. And they made certain decisions which has brought them to where they are now. First decision, they were going to allocate a fixed percentage of their GDP every year towards digitization. Second decision, their digitization will be locally driven. They would buy no systems from anybody, anywhere. That, over the years, has led them to the position where they are now, where they have systems and implementations that are the envy of the world and are being taken up by people all around the world. And one last thing I will tell you about Estonia. The population of Estonia is 1.5 million people. They're smaller than Trinidad and Tobago, but they are the world leaders in digitization, especially for smaller nations. We could do the same. We should not be looking to go and acquire other people's system as a default position. By all means, if we can't do something, yes, let's buy it from somewhere else. But let us have the confidence. Not just expect the kids to have the confidence to wake up and do it. Let us have the confidence in them and ourselves that we could do it too.
So you're talking about the kids. I want to bring Chrisette in for her closing comments on this particular topic of the digital economy. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about what David is saying as well? Lead by example. Instead of looking at someone else, let's do it for ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago.
I mean, most definitely, our society is unique. We're a plural society, and as raised before, the different challenges that we had continue to face. But I feel like what was addressed in today's budget, and I'm always an advocate for collaborating with civil society, and I heard that they are going to collaborate with civil society organizations to roll out the digital literacy program. So I'm really excited with that. I really do hope that these programs target the children and the youth, and I know that the Ministry of National Youth Development and National Service, my DNS, I know that they have been having programs that deals with social media, etc. And as Kaleem mentioned before, it's a ministry that had a very small budget, but yet still did so much. And I think if other ministries take part, even include young people in decision-making, political decision-making, which is something I'm very passionate about, you would see that development happening. So consulting young people when it comes to digital programs, I think is a direction that we could also head towards, because, for example, the 18th National Youth Parliament was based on digital transformation and digital economy, and that cohort would have presented so much great ideas. So if a report could be pulled from that and you look into the ideas and programs that they would have pitched. I remember one person would have pitched an idea, can't remember the name of the program she posed, but as particularly for local government. So you could tap into that knowledge pool when it comes to digital transformation.
Okay, and Mr. Parry, your final thoughts on the digital economy, or have you shared enough thoughts on the economy?
One thing, digital transformation is more about people than technology. Okay. We have to transform thinking, thought, and I can tell you, I want to agree with Mr. Walker.
Let's leave it as David for
David, that we do have the talent locally. I have been in the IT business for over 30 years. We've worked for some of the largest companies in Trinidad and Tobago. We've partnered with some of the global companies, and our local boys do the work here with very little supervision.
Let me correct you, please.
Sure.
And girls.
And girls, local boys and girls.
Very true, very true. So,
so I support that 100%.
There we go, support, seeing that. Yes. So Minister West, I'm coming to you last, because after hearing everything on the table, what's your final comments on this particular topic?
So I would like to assure Christy that we are consulting. For example, for the work from home, one of the groups we are meeting with are the physically challenged, because they will have a particular interest in the work from home program. So we are consulting widely, including the Ministry of Digital Transformation. The Ministry of Digital Transformation is building out a program that will be maintained and supported and grown by local people. So your comment is being taken care of as well. It is very important. And we do have a lot of bright people who work for all the international companies, so we are taking advantage of that. I think digital transformation will do exactly what it says. It will transform Trinidad and Tobago. So it's something that all the ministries are keen on working towards, so that in a few years you will see not only a different public service, but a different Trinidad and Tobago. And I believe that that will redound to the benefit of all citizens and have a marked improvement in the operation of the public service as well as the private sector.
All right, transform Trinidad and Tobago, keeping in the theme of forging pathways to prosperity, which was the general theme of that budget 2025. So thank you very much to those on the table this evening. We are going to be joined very shortly by Minister Foster Cummings, the Minister of Youth Development and National Service, as well as rejoining us will be Joel Pemberton, and we will also be rejoined by Kaleem T. Ali. Joining us on set just after this very fast break as well will be the Minister of Public Utilities. So do stay with us. We are talking beyond the numbers here, Budget 2025. What does it mean for your pocket when we come back?
Yeah, mussels, not mussels,
Extremely gourmet food here by Auntie K. I'm gonna get that scallop. Kind of feels like a scallop with some bread pudding and definitely some green seasoning. Oh yeah, and there's a lot more food to come.
You are dearer to me than all the stars. So many wish but never reach. 'Cause when I'm falling and all the world seems dark, you help me find my peace. Oshun mi ba vishani. Oshun mi ba yeah. Oshun mi ba vishani. Arubita yeah 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 yeah
Welcome to the highly anticipated second season of Caribbean Medical TV, the first and only medical TV series that showcases the Caribbean.
Welcome to all of you in the Caribbean territory and beyond. I am Dr. Mariam Abdul-Richards, on location in Trinidad and Tobago.
Like season 1, the voices of our very own citizens, our local and regional doctors and medical experts forged the basis of the show. This series aims to empower our people with knowledge, from ways of detecting to ways of healing ourselves. This is truly a holistic wellness agenda for our Caribbean people. Join us on Caribbean Medical TV right here on this station.
So we're now standing on the bank of the Marianne River right here in Blanchisseuse, and we're now making our way to Avocat. As you can see, we have a lot of gear with us, and we're actually preparing to rappel this amazing waterfall.
We are back. This is Beyond the Numbers right here on TTT, and we have been having some interesting conversation looking at digitalization or the digital economy just a few minutes ago, looking at that progress reports and how it's been working, and we've been pretty much hearing that it is the right way going forward. It's a critical sector for funding within the budget. It is a system where going cashless seems to be better, not just across the voice of the youth, but across the general public. So now we're going to move into other areas, other sectors that would have seen allocations. And if we could just bring that graphic up yet again, where we have the major fiscal allocations for 2025 and see where those sectors would have been the heavy hitters and then some areas getting regular amounts. And you're seeing it on your screen. We have been hearing about Tobago getting a well-deserved $2.599 billion and other sectors as well. Joining me on set right now, and we're hoping that no one is trading notes while we have this discussion, because we do have Minister of Public Utilities Marvin Gonzalez. Welcome this evening. We are rejoined by Joel Pemberton as well as Kaleem Ali, and we also have Minister Foster Cummings for Youth Development and National Service. Youth has come up a lot in this budget, in this fiscal allocations for the year. From what we've been hearing, it touches every sector of youth across Trinidad and Tobago. Kaleem is shaking his head in agreement. He is definitely ready to hear what new initiatives are going to be coming forward from this budget.
Well, you know, the youth is our future. And that is why the government has dedicated so much resources to youth development. Prior to now, this was a division in a ministry. And receiving an allocation of 300 plus million, that would never have happened if this were a division. So that now that youth development has been given this type of priority, we are going to continue the work we have been doing in terms of investing in our young people, which, as I said, is the future of Trinidad and Tobago. And we have a wide suite of programs that is geared towards training youths towards employment and towards business in particular, because we are concerned about creating a new cadre of business people coming from the youth population, as well as a focus on agriculture as a career option for young people. As the discussion goes on, I'm sure I'll be able to share many of the programs with you. Some of the programs we partner with Ministry of Public Utilities with apprenticeship programs at TN Tech and with WASA. We have a lot of industrial programs, heavy equipment operation, etc., catering for the construction sector. We have programs in the energy sector. For the first time, we have an investment unlike any other time in young people, and I suppose that is why you've been hearing so much about youth work and youth development taking place in the government.
Right. So we have been seeing a lot of work surrounding that youth sector. So you just brought in the element of WASA there. So Minister, not to jump from minister to minister, but I do have to ask, the Minister of Finance did indicate that there is a new business model that is going to satisfy the needs of the nation. What business model is that exactly? What can we look forward to with WASA?
Well, WASA is going through some transformation, has been going through some transformation over the last 4 years. The first aspect of it is institutional transformation, where we are looking to insert a new executive leadership for the organization. And you would have heard from recently some announcements, being made with respect to a new chief executive officer, new managers to manage the various regions, Northeast, Northwest, Central, and Tobago. Some assistant directors are going to be brought on board very soon. So from an institutional perspective, that transformation is also taking place. But we are also looking at transformation from an infrastructure perspective. The government would have announced 2 or 3 years ago a loan arrangement with the IDB to the tune of $80 million, which is the first loan operation from a total envelope of $315 million. So the first loan arrangement is to get access to $80 million. And the main purpose of that loan is for water sector transformation as well. And under that, you have items such as building climate resilience, refurbishment of aged infrastructure, where a lot of our plants that went, into a state whereby their production capacity would have declined as a result of deterioration of the assets. So North Oropouche, Hillsborough, the Freeport Water Treatment Plant, Chatham, a lot of these plants that fell because of age infrastructure, and they reduced their capacity. A lot of these plants would be refurbished where their production capacity is going to be restored, and a number of communities, hundreds of thousands of people that those plants serve, will see a massive improvement in their water supply. The Guanapo Water Treatment Plant, for example, after that plant is refurbished, that plant is responsible for providing the people of Arima with a supply of water. After that plant is refurbished, you're looking at an increased capacity of 2 to 3 million gallons of water per day that will transform the whole of Arima. Just using that as an example, serving 20,000 people in that Arima catchment, close to 24/7 supply of water. And there are new plants that are going to be constructed in Santa Cruz. We hope to start construction of that plant by the end of the year, or the first item in January 2025. And in Tobago, the Goldsboro Water Treatment Plant, we had the last consultation that took place 2 weeks ago, and they're looking to commence construction in about 2 weeks' time. So a lot is taking place, and that is just one aspect of the transformation of WASA. We have the Community Water Improvement Program, and then you have the National Water Stabilization and Improvement Program. Hopefully, during the discussion, I'll go into further details where we are looking at areas like Chatham, Palo Seco, and Mayaro, Maruga, all of those places that suffered for water for decades. We are targeting those areas to implement short-term projects where already a lot of these people are seeing an improvement in their supply of water.
So what about incentives where we are looking at enhancing energy through wind, solar, and water? I would assume that falls within your ministry.
Of course. So we have granted a license for that solar project with BP and Shell, where a new solar plant is going to be constructed in Brescia Castle that would produce over 20 megawatts of electricity. I think that is what we're talking about. And increasing our production of electricity via renewable power and reducing our reliance on energy from carbon. So that project is ongoing. We are also looking at the construction of solar projects on schools. We have recently launched a new solar project in Charlottesville in Tobago, where the Charlottesville Methodist School is now reliant on its own solar-powered process for the generation of electricity, and we are looking to expand that in Five Rivers and other schools, thereby removing those schools from their reliance on the electricity grid, where they can generate their own electricity, and of course the Ministry of Education will have a lower bill from that they owe the Trinidad and Tobago Electricity Commission. In addition to that, the Ministry of Public Utilities also approved approximately 15 or 20 renewable energy projects, thereby allowing the private sector to enter into that whole arena of generating electricity by the use of wind and solar.
So you're looking at more green initiatives being pushed into initiatives that will enhance our nation going into that next fiscal year.
That's the main focus.
So Monty, given your background with energy and the energy sector, do you see these initiatives working and benefiting the people of Trinidad and Tobago?
Absolutely. I'd say you'll need more, but this is a start, right? And it's always about an energy transition. You can't just transition immediately because you'll have severe impacts, economic impact, etc. So it's just a step in the right direction. It is a transition. You can't do all at once. So absolutely positive in that regard. One point I think to note is, 50, 60 years ago, right, this economy is really powered up by cheap electricity, right? And that is what really created the economic or the wealth of this country. And that's an anchor, right? And I think we can't lose sight of that anchor, especially when we talk about diversification, increasing the manufacturing sector and so on. Everything needs power. We won't be here without power, right? And you can't store power. So there's no such thing as a low power rich country. The more power that you have, you create wealth. So increasing electricity production and consumption is a direct link to wealth generation. So I said step in the right direction, all right? And I think it'll go along the path. And as you relax the laws and so on for residential, you're going to see that entrepreneurial spirit, and that's going to power up. But I think we just need to make sure that we always remain competitive, because that's what really, people realize that it was the flared gas that was used that, I don't know, 67, probably, well, older than me, that really powered up this economy. So that's a huge competitive advantage we have that we need to maintain, especially with regards to building other industries, whether it be the e-tech park, whether it be all of these other initiatives. You need competitive power.
Very interesting. Before we bring in Kaleem, we just want to identify that one of the ministries that would have been given a large portion in budgetary allocations would have been the Ministry of Education. And they received a budgetary allocation of $7.251 billion. This allocation will supplement special purpose loan finances to allow for urgently needed school repairs, amongst other things. So let's take a look at what those other things are in this report.
The Ministry of Education's $1,000 school supplies and book grant and vacation revision program are among the programs that will be sustained in the next fiscal year. As he shared plans for the education sector, the finance minister highlighted the work being done to establish a digital ecosystem.
These efforts culminate in the introduction of a numeracy adaptive learning platform by January 2025. This innovative platform will facilitate the creation of diagnostic databases and tailored numeracy experiences to foster numeracy development, remediation, and progress monitoring.
Minister Imbert said there will also be enhancements to the Government Assistance for Tuition Expenses Program, or GATE.
These will include assessing approved students' ability to contribute to tuition costs, streamlining the processing of claims for improved efficiency, and supporting the scholarship division with means testing for bursary applications, along with verifying programs' eligibility for bursary awards. These funding initiatives serve as a beneficial lifeline, ensuring that the most vulnerable groups, as well as the most talented students, receive the necessary support to thrive.
Recognizing that educators are the bedrock upon which society progress rests, he said government has embarked on a comprehensive approach to teacher development and noted plans to address financial challenges at the University of the West Indies.
The government is aware of its financial difficulties and plans to settle any mutually agreed outstanding arrears in 2025.
Minister Imbert said they will be establishing a $50 million Building Trinidad and Tobago, or BTT, initiative.
This program is based on the Community Recovery Committee's recommendation and aims to uplift communities identified as at risk, promoting community pride, social support, economic and human development. The specific groups being targeted are persons under the threshold of a full certificate at CSEC level, unemployed and underemployed persons, ex-convicts, small micro-entrepreneurs and crime victims.
The allocation to the education sector was the second highest allocation in the fiscal 2025 package. I am Stacey-Ann Providence for TDT News.
All right, so the second highest allocation, Minister Cummings, tell us, how do you feel about education getting that sector, knowing that your ministry surrounds that particular age group of people? Yes, it is the Ministry of Education, but your ministry deals a lot with developing these young people.
We work very closely with the Ministry of Education. As a matter of fact, we practice an all-of-government approach in implementing these several programs throughout the government. So we work closely with Education, we work closely with Ministry of Trade and Industry, Ministry of Public Utilities, and Ministry of Communication. I guess that is how you know so much about what is happening within the ministries, because the Ministry of Communication assists us in rolling out our communication strategy. So that what are we doing? We are investing in our youth. Those who are at the secondary level, those who are at the primary level, the tertiary level. You know, we happen to be a fortunate country where from preschool to primary school to secondary school to university, the government funds the bill for our citizens. There are not many countries in this part of the world that can say and can boast of that. And what we recognize is that there's a group of young persons that we have to pay particular attention to. We refer to them as NEET. They're not in employment, they're not in education, or they're not in training. They may have exited the secondary school system, and they are in the society pretty much the unproductive group, because they may not have excelled at school and they now need to be paid some particular attention to. And we have done our homework in identifying and coming up with a skills for work program. So we know where the gaps exist, and we have fashion training programs to suit that so we can fill those gaps. So you will see we roll out programs in crane operations. That's not something you hear about every Monday morning. Heavy equipment operation, backhoe, excavators, skid steer. You will see that we've been doing programs in training persons how to conduct business using the internet. So we are identifying these gaps, and we are training people to make sure they get either directly into employment or on the workforce. The Ministry of Trade and Industry, for instance, runs a woodworking apprenticeship program. They recently launched one for the yachting industry, right? And so when you do that, you don't just train young people and then they're frustrated on the side, not being sure what to do thereafter. You're training them to enter the workforce, either through our apprenticeship programs, which we run very successfully. I mentioned the one with Tech, one with WASA. We're doing one with Heritage right now in Palo Seco. We launched a drilling rig operation program in St. Madeleine recently, being run by NESC, so that we are saying to our young people, this is the opportunity, this is your opportunity. The government is investing in you, the taxpayer is funding these operations, all towards their holistic development, but also providing for the business sector the skilled workforce that they require to achieve their objectives.
So Kaleem, speaking on behalf of the young people, that youth community, do you feel that those initiatives that the minister is highlighting and emphasizing, is it reaching the people that it needs to reach?
I think the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service has done a very good job at engaging young people, connecting with young people, and getting young people to contribute in meaningful ways. Of course, we have to acknowledge that no system is perfect, and there will always be young people who would not buy in to what is being offered to them. And those reasons are the reasons that have to be probed and that we have to look at. Why do some youth feel disconnected from certain areas as opposed to others? Now, the ministry has also taken on a very aggressive approach at ensuring that, as Minister just mentioned, young people who do not necessarily thrive in an academic setting do not get excluded from being valued and contributing members of society. But I would say that we need to have a little bit more innovation as well. As the world continues to progress and the needs of the world continues to progress, there are new and emerging fields that we really need to focus our attention on and get young people into those fields as well. So, and part of that requires us to take an intergenerational approach and an intersectional approach. And so the ministry has done a good job, for example, with its program 40 Under 40, connecting 40 people with who have distinguished themselves as young people within the national community and having them go into schools and other social settings and engage with younger people to provide some level of aspiration. Now, we could flip that around a little bit as well. And when in the previous segment, you all were talking about digitization, and I sat there and I was thinking, okay, so we have a Ministry of Youth, we have a Ministry of Digital Transformation. If the age gap is a problem, then young people could also become mentors for older persons in navigating the digital divide. When I look at youth engagement too, I definitely would like to see more youth engagement in ministries, in business settings, and in those types of environments with youth being decision makers. We have a perception to look at youth as the benefactors or the beneficiaries of the future, but we have to understand that the youth today are the present. They're not the future. The future youth are those who have not been born as yet, or those very, very young children who are now growing up. We would have recently concluded, for example, the Pact to the Future, as I mentioned, which born out of that comes a declaration for future generations that puts specific requirements on governments across the world to really create circumstances and an enabling environment for young people to actively and meaningfully participate in decision-making processes. So when we look at youth engagement, we can't just look at it in terms of upskilling youth or focusing on underutilized young people. We also need to tap into those young people who've established themselves and put them into positions of decision makers and allow them the opportunity to lead, to contribute, and to help develop the future of Trinidad and Tobago. Because like I said, we are the now. And as long as I remember one sitting in another place and hearing, and I always say it when I talk about youth engagement and youth development, the importance or the value of it, and I do see it being reflected in this budget with a $68 million increase to the ministry and such a sizable increase to the such a sizable figure to the Ministry of Education, is that if we focus on young people today and work with young people today, then in the future we have less adults who need rehabilitation and less adults who need reintegration into society. So, you know, I have to commend the ministry for the work that they have been doing, but there is always room for improvement.
All right,
So I'd like to interject.
Yes, go ahead.
We touched on it early on. I think because of the large allocation to the Ministry of Education, what you're seeing globally in terms of the skill development and the transformation in education systems throughout Europe, the US, Canada, Japan, Southeast Asia, China, with STEM and so on, you know, what I'd like to see is almost how do we adjust, transform our curriculum from primary into secondary, to some extent into tertiary, to really create the skills that are required before they get into your ministry, right? Because you might be getting students who are coming out where these skills may not be required. With AI, business models are being revamped globally, right? So, and at a very rapid pace. So we have to get ahead of that game. And I think some of these schools like the private schools might be a bit more advanced than the public schools, but I think we have a great opportunity to really look at that curriculum critically, right? And also introduce some soft skills from critical thinking, mental health, at a primary school age, at a secondary school. There are things we could do at that stage so that, I wouldn't say it's less work for Ministry of Youth Development, but you're going to be getting a different cadre of folks coming out that are better skilled for the future. And so I'd love to see that breakdown of the education budget. You know, could some be allocated to a think tank of what will work for us? You know, a lot of folks, I have a 10-year-old son, SC is like, oh my God, there's more stress on the parents, right? Quite frankly, you know, is it still relevant? I don't know, right? Those are questions I think we might need to challenge and then reform, etc. So that's my only comment with the budget, is how do we sort of reform looking 10, 15, 20 years out? What got us here did a good job. I'm not sure what got us here is going to take us 50 years from an educational perspective.
Okay, interesting. Ministers, do you all want to comment on that, or?
Yeah, I've listened to the Minister of Education, looking and talking about the current school syllabus, and I think the Ministry of Education has done quite a lot of work to modernize and upgrade its syllabus to deal with the concerns of young people today. Right. Quite a lot, and I think in the budget contribution, the minister will be able to go into some further details. But just to support what Monty is saying, that work has already started. That work is already done. It is an evolving process because the needs of a society, it always changes. It's always moving, and you always have to look at your school syllabus. And I also tell you, Monty, that the public school system is as good as the private school system. Understand? So I heard you make the comment that it may have been done in the private system, but I have a daughter that goes to a private school, and I also know people who attend public schools, and I can tell you that the public schools are doing quite well and perhaps might be doing far better than some private schools. But we will go into some of the details. But just going back a bit to Foster, the Trinidad and Tobago is very fortunate, and I think perhaps might be the only country in the world that has a ministry that is dedicated to young people and their development. And the kind of collaboration that you're seeing with other ministries, as the minister has indicated, Ministry of Public Utilities, Ministry of Trade, also the Ministry of Community Development under Minister Kajo. I have seen the level of collaboration that is taking place. And Minister Cummings didn't talk about MILAT, but I think it was at a MILAT graduation at the Savannah. We would have seen what that program has done to persons who would have left the formal educational system and going into that MILAT program, emerging out of that MILAT program with full certificates and what have you. Some of these stories should be told, and the amount of transformation that is taking place with our young people, especially from marginal societies, I think,
both in academics and in technical vocational.
Exactly. That level of transformation is taking place, and I can just imagine, had it not been for those programs, I wouldn't want to imagine what the state of Trinidad and Tobago would have been, because these programs would have saved thousands of lives and would have given young people an opportunity for them to make something out of themselves. We have a lot of work to do. Minister Cummings' ministry, they go into communities, because the young man, he talked a short while ago about youth not getting access to it and knowing of these projects. You have a youth caravan going in the Beetham Estate, going in Five Rivers, going in La Hoqueta, going in Moruga, going in Mayaru, introducing them. Because for many reasons, young people may not want to come out of their communities to access these programs. But you have a youth caravan going into those communities and introducing them and making necessary changes. It is now up to our young people to understand that these opportunities are there, and it is now up to them to make use of these opportunities so that they can transform their lives. The state can only do as much as it can do, but the responsibility of our young people is to get up, take full responsibility of their lives, and make use of the opportunities that the government is making for them.
That's right. So remember, you can also join the conversation. We are going beyond the numbers here on TTT. So let's take a look at what some people have been saying. They've been looking at us, following us on social media. Let's see what some of the comments have been that's been coming in over the last hour or so. So we have one question. What are your thoughts on the increase of the public servants' minimum wage from $20.50 per hour to $22.50 per hour? And some of the responses. All right. It is a help to those workers, from Gregory Sabero. Another person comments, Mr. Harry says, an increase on pay is good. Any increase, rather. Felicia Mohammed, it's better than nothing. And Sean is saying, I'm happy for those people. Our last one from social media based on that question. Thank God for small mercies. Now, when you all hear things like that, people are saying, thank God they give us something. An increase of $2. And this particular sector, this particular group of people, because there so many of the comments are saying those people. Yes. Is it that this is reaching everybody?
Let me come in here, please. Before I came on set, people from my constituency, Lupino Boniores, have already started reaching out to me. The CPEP workers, the URP workers, the MTS workers, thousands of them all over this country. As soon as you enter the doors of your ministry, you are greeted by an MTS security officer. The person and the woman that comes into your office to clean your office and make sure that your office is in good condition is an MTS worker. And when I heard the budgetary measure being mentioned by the Minister of Finance when we approved it this morning in Cabinet, I think of those workers whose lives are going to be impacted. And the age VIP, we talk about the increase in minimum wage. Minister Cummings would tell you, and any minister who sits here would tell you, the age VIP program, it's a program where persons who, because of their living circumstances, cannot access a mortgage at TTMF or in the bank. Now once they fulfill certain conditions, they now have access to $200,000 to build a home, to have a place that they can call home. These budgetary measures are impacting ordinary folks, thousands of them. They depend on this URP pay, every month or every fortnight. The MTS workers, the MTS security guard, the CPEP workers, all of these women who work very hard on a daily basis, contributing to supporting their families. I can just imagine the positive impact it is going to have on their lives. It is not insignificant, but it is going to be a tremendous help for them, where they can buy an extra pack of rice, flour, etc., and to put on their family table.
Right, and I know, Monty, we were talking earlier about that workforce being impacted by this increase as well. Any other thoughts that you have on this particular topic with the minimum wage increase?
The public servants, as I said earlier, I think it's positive. I firmly believe public servants are underpaid, right? One could argue about output, but when you look at what's required of them, when you look at the cost of living, when you look at those sort of things, my view is they should be paid a much better wage and then demand better output and so on. But, I hate to use this phrase, but if you pay peanuts, you're going to get, right? So you got to pay, so that's my perspective, but I'm coming from a business perspective, not a government perspective.
One of the points raised by Minister is that this touches people at the very lowest end of the ladder. Right. The CPEP workers, the MTS workers, the URP workers. So while it may sound like $2.50 or something like that, for the security officer, it may mean an additional $500 monthly that they can take home. For a family working for that, that's significant for them. And I've already received messages after the budget of people being very happy for that increase. And therefore, those types of decisions by government impacts families in a very significant way. That program that Minister Gonzalez spoke about, that age VIP program, has made such a significant difference in the lives of many persons who did not have proper living conditions. They basically live in a shack. And the government stepped in, introduced this program. There's no mortgage to come with it. And you now get a starter home with electricity, running water, flush and toilet. That changes lives in a significant way. And therefore, I think the decision by the finance minister to increase the allocations of that program is going to make a significant difference, particularly in some of the rural communities.
All right, so definitely programs aimed at reducing poverty and vulnerability is the general discussion here. So Kaleem, I want to get your input in on this now.
So I just wanted to weigh in on the increase in minimum wage as well. As both ministers and even Monty himself mentioned, any increase helps, and it makes a difference to a family who depends on income, right? And what we have to understand is, okay, I'm sure that somewhere people are having conversations about the fact that this increase only applies to public servants and it was not across the board. And in responding to that, you have to look at it from two ways. If it was a general increase on minimum wage, then the ripple effect steps in and the price on everything goes up if the private sector is compelled to pay more to their workers. However, we have to understand that what the government has done should be seen as setting an example to the private sector, because there's nothing that prevents or stops the private sector from matching this increase. from it going beyond it. It is a step in the right direction, and it is something that the private sector could take an example from, so that workers in the private sector, in the private sphere, don't feel like they're being disadvantaged. It doesn't boil down to government intervention having to mandate an employer to pay its employees a higher rate.
All right, interesting. And Monty, I just want to get your final thoughts on this particular on the budget itself, not necessarily so much going into that particular area, but just trying to find out, where would we see shortfalls or challenges coming into effect with all of the measures that are going to be put in place from the different or various ministries?
So as I said, it's a balanced budget. We have strong competitive advantages in Trinidad, right? We have a strong asset base. We do have a highly skilled workforce, and we do have capital. Right, and those three are very, very important for taking the economy forward. From where I sit, as I said earlier, I look 10, 20 years out, not year on year. And the key things that I would love to see again is that whole, as you're saying, Honourable Minister, is that education piece. And whilst it being updates to the curriculum, right, I could say globally things are moving at lightning speed. I was just in California this week, and it's literally the whole driverless cars I use, right? So and we're still having taxis, right? And we're way behind. And how do we sort of fast track that to maintain our existing competitiveness? So all those things are good. I just, from a business perspective, things need to be moving a bit faster, right? And then that long-term vision of what is that going to look like, right? Especially we are still heavily reliant on the energy sector. I guess we'll talk about that later. The manufacturing sector is growing at a rapid rate. I mentioned earlier, electricity is going to be a key driver for diversifying the economy. So whether it be solar, in terms of greening it, whether how do you get more power is going to be a critical success factor. And that is going to be a little bit of a challenge. So all in all, balance, but we need to see that long-term vision and how we're executing that a bit faster. So.
Right, and Minister, we have 1 minute for you to just wrap. Give us your final thoughts on the budget presentation.
It is a balanced budget. It is a budget. The Minister of Finance doesn't have all of the financial resources available to him to do everything that the government would like to do. But given our constraints, I think he has struck a very measured tone, taking care of some of the most vulnerable sectors in the society, continuing to lay the foundation to allow diversification of our economy, and identifying and providing resources in some of the critical ministries so that we can continue our thrust of economic development and national development. The important thing that we have to do as ministers is to now take the resources that have been made available to us and ensure that we continue to drive our development program where the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago can reap the rewards and feel the positive effects, because you can. The minister can make a lot of money available to you, but if you do not treat with your implementation strategy to ensure that these projects, they are executed seamlessly and efficiently, then the citizens will not experience the benefits. So money is just one critical component, it's not all. We now have to continue to drive these projects to ensure that the citizens get value for money.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Well, we do have a lot to discuss, and we do want to thank them for their time this evening. Coming up next, we will be bringing on the Minister of Trade and Industry and find out what's really happening within that energy sector as well. But before we head to a quick break, know this, that the Minister of Finance, Mohammed, says that foreign direct investment in the local energy sector is expected to grow in the coming months. And we will be discussing this shortly. The 2025 budget was predicted on an oil price of US $77.80 per barrel and a natural gas price of US $3.59 per MMBTU. Terry Ann Brown Campbell brings us this report, which you'll see now, and we'll be coming back to you after a break.
The local energy sector remains a vital part of this country's economy. This from the Minister of Finance, Mohammed, as he delivered his 10th national budget presentation on Monday.
Foreign direct investment in the upstream sector by oil and gas companies was US $1.4 billion for 2022, US $1.2 billion for 2023, and estimated to be in the vicinity of US $2 billion and US $2.3 billion for 2024 and 2025, respectively.
Minister Mohammed said there are a number of energy projects which are expected to start delivering millions of cubic feet of gas in the coming months. With regard to renewable energy, Minister Imbert said this country is on target to meeting its goal of 30% power generation from renewable sources by 2030.
Another key renewable initiative being undertaken in fiscal 2024 is the establishment of an interagency committee to design, issue, and evaluate a request for proposal document for utility-scale solar projects on non-utilized state lands.
The minister also noted that a renewable energy system will be installed at the Brighton port, supporting Libidco's Eco-Port certification efforts. Terry Ann Brown-Campbell, TTT News.
If it matters to you, it matters to us. We report the news. News in real time. TTT News, nightly at 6. TTT News, committed, accurate, relevant.
So we're now standing on the bank of the Marianne River, right here in Blanchisseuse, and we're now making our way to Avocat. As you can see, we have a lot of gear with us, and we're actually preparing to rappel this amazing waterfall.
Welcome to the highly anticipated second season of Caribbean Medical TV, the first and only medical TV series that showcases the Caribbean.
Welcome to all of you in the Caribbean territory and beyond. I am Dr. Mariam Abdul-Richards, on location in Trinidad and Tobago.
Like season 1, the voices of our very own citizens, our local and regional doctors and medical experts forge the basis of the show. This series aims to empower our people with knowledge, from ways of detecting to ways of healing ourselves. This is truly a holistic wellness agenda for our Caribbean people. Join us on Caribbean Medical TV right here on this station.
You can come down to the Optimal Life Wellness Center, where it is safe, it is affordable.
You don't have to take my word for it. You can come down to the Optimal Life Wellness Center and see for yourself and experience for yourself what I have experienced. The life I now live is a lot healthier and more fulfilling. These products have actually given me a sense of a future, and very, very important.
Line and Length, the #1 cricket program in the West Indies, is on TTT. Line and Length brings you up-to-date interviews, analysis, and highlights on the game in the region and internationally. Plus, there's an added bonus to receive a gift of gear each month with our grassroots program. Go to lineandlength.net to learn more. Line and Length in association with Massey United Insurance on TTT.
I'm Renee Sion with another edition of Caribbean Week in Review.
welcome back. This is Beyond the Numbers here on TTT. We are discussing Budget 2025, the fiscal year allocations and everything about it. So if you're now joining us, well, you're a bit late. After that lengthy budget discussion, we are now joined by the Minister of Trade and Industry, Senator Paula Gopi-Scoon, and we are also rejoined by some of our guests that you would have seen before, Chrisette Benjamin, a youth activist. We also have Rushton Parry, the MP for Mayaro, as well as Minister Foster Cummings, who is with us from the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. Now, we have been seeing and talking a lot about economic diversification. It is something that people want to hear and see manifested through this budget, in particular for 2025. So at this point, I'd like to bring in Minister of Trade and Industry, Paula. Madam Senator, what are your thoughts when it comes to diversification of Trinidad and Tobago and getting people really involved and away from the traditional sectors?
Good. So the evidence is there because the contribution to GDP by the non-energy sector has been substantial. I looked at the numbers. Non-energy, $107 billion to a total GDP of $147 billion. Now, the successful stories within the non-energy sector would be manufacturing, and then that other sector called trade and repairs. Sometimes people don't know what it is, but it is wholesale and retail business. So it's when we talk about manufacturing sector, that's just ex-factory. But beyond that, there's a wholesale and retail, and that is in that sector, which has contributed significantly as well, some $38 billion to GDP. Another sector that has been doing extremely well, apart from the manufacturing sector, the trade and repairs, would be the tourism sector, where there's great potential, and we're seeing the potential. And the Minister of Finance actually announced some of the growth areas that we can see and the exciting projects that are to take place within that sector. And of course, but for me, the manufacturing sector is key, but as well the services sector. While the financial services performs exceedingly well and it has a huge contribution to the country's GDP, what we don't export are financial services. And one of the areas we'd want to work on in this coming fiscal would be the export of the financial services sector and the other services sectors as well. So those are new growth opportunities. So yes, manufacturing, but I'm seeing substantial opportunities in tourism, in export of services as well, including financial services as well. There's expected to be growth as well on the agricultural side. And of course, given the responsibilities of the Ministry of Youth and National Development, and primarily the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries, there are a number of ongoing projects on specifically targeted products for growth. Mm-hmm. And so we're excited about what is to happen there as well.
So you mentioned the agriculture sector. We are joined as well via Zoom by Mr. Riyad Mohammed. He's the lead agricultural consultant. And Riyad, you're able to hear us?
Hi, yes.
All
Good
right.
evening.
Good evening, Riyad, and welcome to our discussion here. Riyad, we're touching on the sector for agriculture. Yet again, just over $1 billion being invested into this particular sector. Has your budget wish list for this sector come to pass?
So I was expecting just over $1 billion. I know last year's budget was $1.44 billion. However, what we have to do in the agri sector is really strategically manage how we spend and utilize those funds. I think one of your previous colleagues on the panel mentioned that as well as the management of how we spend that finance in the most critical areas.
So when you say spend it in the most critical areas, in particular for you, what do you or where do you see that being invested in the agriculture sector? Yet again, we have been hearing about tax-free benefits within your sector, for the agri sector, for legislation as well. We've been looking at where the fishermen are concerned. So it's not just looking at what we consider regular or basic agriculture. We're looking at fisher folk. We're looking at agro-incentive grants. How does all of that translate for you going forward?
Okay, so in the agri sector, we have many players or many stakeholders. Farmers are just one stakeholder. We have a few issues that we have, I guess, for the last 3 decades. So it's not nowadays issues, right? Let me just list some of them very briefly. We have issues still of land tenureship. Some farmers find it, well, new farmers find it a bit hard to still access a farmer's badge, even accessing agricultural loans. The list of requirements are so very high, and it's a bit tough for them to access financing, even getting access to water in dry season, power, road access to the agricultural lands. And you see now with that excess damage of climate change, we're getting so much more pest and disease in the sector, for example, the giant African snail, or the locust, or the coconut weevil, and the beetle. I must commend, I must commend Minister Hussein and his team for boosting up that perennial larceny squad. We have had significant wins over the last almost a year of how that has reduced in terms of perennial larceny nationally as well. Something that farmers usually cannot control is the high cost of agri-input supplies, for example, your chemicals or agri-input supplies, fertilizers, seeds. Even there are other issues that occur in the sector, and we need to be mindful of them, although not mentioned as often. For example, these food producers, they are exposed to chemical hazards. Even workers that work on farms, they are not equipped properly, poor working conditions, no PPE. Even the basic health facilities are not there. So all of those things we have to combat and fight against to produce safe and nutritious food consistently. And I'd like to also thank the Minister of Trade to how she mentioned that manufacturing sector as an exportable commodity, because that's where I see we in agriculture should be headed to create exportable products to earn that foreign exchange.
Right, and a lot of consideration now is being given to the cocoa industry, as well as bringing back that rice farming initiative. So there seems to be a lot of smart agricultural incentives. So I see Minister Cummings, you want to come in here?
To see, based on what Riyad's comments, is that the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Youth Development have been working very closely together. And yes, there's been significant work done by the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of the perennial larceny squad. That is a complaint that we receive very often as you interact with farmers. In terms of the access roads, the ministry has a very robust program of access roads, particularly in those rural communities where farmers are having difficulty in terms of reaching to their crops and getting their crops out to market. And as well, in terms of the training and development of existing and future farmers. The government has played a lot of emphasis on training new farmers. We have boasted that by 2025 we would have trained an additional 1,500 new farmers, mostly youthful farmers, some of them already involved in farming. But that safe practice that Riyadh speaks about is to make sure that they receive the requisite training. And we've partnered with UWI, we've partnered with UTT to make sure that they are certified at the end of the day and that they have best practice and modern technology in terms of executing their practices. Now, we have the Homestead program, which will train 1,000 new homestead farmers by 2025, giving them, at the end of their training, 2 acres of land, a starter home, a grant of $20,000 to start their agricultural business, and all of that is tied to agro-processing initiative that will allow them to add value to their produce. Those that will not take it immediately to market, they can then supply manufacturers of different products and so. We have the Shade House program, which is the protected agriculture program, which we're doing at Tucker Valley in Chaguaramas. And that program will train about 300 new farmers, and they will be formed into a cooperative, those who don't go off on their own, to produce all different types of vegetables, much of which we import at this point in time. So it's supplying the local market, the hotels, the supermarkets, the restaurants, etc., with some of the things that they would usually import, like broccoli, etc. Okay. And in the third program is the aquaculture program, which will train 200 new farmers in aquaculture. And that is also intended to supply the local market. But while we're doing all of that, the Ministry of Agriculture is focusing on the rice industry and also the coconut. We have had a lot of difficulties with our coconut before. We got some plants in from Guyana, and we are providing those through the Ministry of Agriculture to many farmers to resuscitate the coconut market. And you mentioned the cocoa. A lot of work is also being done there in terms of collaboration with UWI, research and promotion of and resuscitation of what we had before. Russian, who's from Mary, will tell you that cocoa was once the pride of Trinidad and Tobago, and I think we're heading back in that direction.
So clearly there is a push for growth and rehabilitation and revitalization of these particular areas within the agriculture sector. You know, Mr. Parry, I want to bring you back in here to find out, are these areas that you see we can move forward as a nation to put us back into that place where we can say that we have done enough, that this government has done enough for its people?
Absolutely. I mean, everything that was said before, it's in the right direction. I find, you know, after 9 years, this is the 10th budget, a lot of what was said today, I mean, with the greatest respect to the ministers, a lot of recycled conversation. We've been talking rice, we've been talking cocoa, we've been talking a lot of stuff for years. Bits and pieces have been invested in the industries, but nothing substantial has come. I mean, I still looking for the 900 coconut trees on the eastern seaboard, right? I mean, it's something I joked with Clarence in the past, that where is this? Now, I want to give kudos to the Minister of Trade in that, you know, what they've done with the manufacturing sector has done very, very well. I mean, I have seen it. I have seen the improvement in the manufacturing sector, the non-energy manufacturing sector, which is good. But Minister, what you find happening from the SMEs below those guys, it's a complaint that would come very, very often in terms of the issue of the access to foreign exchange. Right. For a lot of small businesses, our access to foreign exchange is through the credit cards. Now today, every 3 months, the banks are curtailing and shrinking that as well. That is causing problems to a lot of community business. And it's so important. We must understand that small businesses and communities are critical components of the development of communities, in that they give credit, they sponsor sports, they do things in the community that help uplift, they hire the most amount of local people. So in their view, they feel that the state is focusing on the middle and the high boys and them, and that they're getting these monies and so on. And that they're not doing that. There is also the issue of, you know, the complaints about the distribution. How come some people will get thousands of dollars and some of us getting $500? I don't think the Minister of Finance has addressed that in any reasonable, satisfactory way for these small businesses in this country. You know, when you look at a lot of those things, it really feels that there's some disadvantage in terms of how they feel as small businesses. If you just allow me to touch one thing on the agricultural issue, there are two fundamental problems that our farmers face. One is the issue of land tenure. The fact that the homestead program is doing this project where you're giving out, you know, these 200 or 300, 500 grants and houses and the leases. What about the 5,000 odd farmers who have been waiting 25, 30 years for their leases as well? That is creating a bit of a problem. We talk about digitizing that for many, many years. You talk about farmers not being able to repay loans. They can't get access to loans because of these things. And those who are getting access to loan, there is an issue of the accounting where they feel that perhaps we have to change the way that payments are made. You know, you either look at payments based on when the crop comes in, have different payment schedules for different type of crops, because your payment cycle in the manufacturing industry, where you pay an installment every month, it doesn't work the same way in the farming sector. So I find those are things that we have to address at a policy level to make life easier for our farmers to contribute, because we want them to produce. We want them to produce as much as we can, get the surplus into packaging houses that we can bring it back out into the market when there's scarcity, when the crop is out of season, so we maintain prices and so on. We've collapsed so many of our packaging houses over the last couple of years. You know, things are in Tabaquite. We've had a massive packaging house that have been left abandoned, and, you know, people steal out all of the stuff. And so those things we have to address at a policy level to strengthen our agricultural sector.
Right. So at that point, I want to bring Riyadh back into the conversation. You know, you're touching on that particular point. Riyadh, do you share that sentiment as well as to Mr. Parry?
Yes, I know so much more things could be done, and I really see the drive by the government, especially in strategic areas. And Minister comments what I mentioned. the big drive for youth to get deeper into the agri system. And I know, yes, we still have outstanding issues. And what I have observed is when I do some research on these issues, they really are almost 2 to 3 decades old. Yeah, but we keep on itemizing it and we keep on focusing on it, as well as I am seeing bits of land leases being resolved over a period of time, publications. I'm seeing more and more grants being given out. So I'm proud about these achievements in the agri sector so far.
All right.
Can I just add, in terms of the leases, that, I mean, we know that has been a problem for some time, but we approve, as a government, we have approved a significant number of leases. I know there are still people who are waiting, but it is something that is going to be digitized eventually. There's a program towards that, and that is going to increase on the efficiency. But we have an aging farming population. That is a fact. And therefore, what we are, in taking all of those things into consideration, we also know that we have to make sure and train new farmers and bring new farmers into the market. And we're not only giving them the training, we're making sure that they have all the tools to actually be successful. So that's where the land comes in, that's where the homestead comes in, that's where the grant comes in. And outside of that, the government also has a 100,000 farmers incentive grant for existing farmers who want to improve on their equipment and so forth, can apply to the ministry and get not a loan, but a grant of $100,000. I've attended a few ceremonies where many farmers have received that grant.
Right.
And then we have many incentives for farmers, probably the most incentives this part of the world. For almost every aspect of their operation, there is some sort of assistance given by the government to help them along the way. So yes, we have the problems of the land tenure and so that we'll be treating with, but there is a lot in place that the government has done for farmers, and in particular, the announcement again today of the tax-free arrangements for the agricultural sector.
Right,
and
that's what I want to bring
respond.
you in.
Yeah, I would want to respond to Rushton. And Rushton, thank you for recognizing the success of the manufacturing sector to date. But you raised the point about foreign exchange. Know that traditionally, foreign exchange would be secured through the commercial banks. Many years ago, the Minister, and probably just 4 years ago, the Minister of Finance opened up this new scheme with the Exim Bank providing foreign exchange, one, to manufacturers and also to those importers of basic food items. To date, this government has given, through the Exim Bank, support to the extent of more than $1 billion to importers of essential items and close to another $1 billion to manufacturers for securing foreign exchange for inputs into manufacturing and also for the purchase of machinery and equipment or so on. When we looked at the distribution as to whether or not we were supporting big business only, primarily we were supporting small and medium-sized businesses with access to foreign exchange. With regard to access to finance, in a post-COVID environment, there were several interventions by the Ministry of Finance, with the more recent one being done through 4 of the major commercial banks, where you can access, I think it's up to $10 million or so, with very soft conditions in terms of interest rates, moratorium, 10-year repayment period, and so on. And a number of small and medium-sized businesses have been accessing those funds through the commercial banks. But that apart, there are so many grants that are available to small and micro businesses through several ministries: Ministry of Trade and Industry, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Youth and National Development, and a number of ministries across the board. There is support. Ministry of Digital Transformation for the for software producers and so on. So access to finance, whether it is foreign exchange, whether it is finance or building out your businesses, whether it is access to grants, they are all available across several ministries, particularly so in the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So I think that we have been very inclusive when it comes to trade, in ensuring that our micro, our small, our medium, as well as our large, have access to government facilities, and we provide that enabling environment for them to grow. And I'm seeing the new products on the market. You talked about agro-processing. I was so surprised, and perhaps you all should have attended the agriculture forum or expo, which just took place, to see the new products on the market in agro-processing. For instance, when I saw ghee produced locally and available now at all of the Puja stores, that's import substitution, because we import ghee for Parasad and Paratha and so on. Now you can buy that in Trinidad and Tobago, made locally. So I think if you extend yourself, you would recognize that there's much happening within the manufacturing sector, but targeted to improve and encourage micro and small businesses in expanding within the manufacturing sector and in the retail sector as well, in the agricultural sector as well.
For the micro entrepreneurs, as Minister was just pointing out, we have grants across various ministries. At Ministry of Youth Development, for instance, through NEDCO, the government has decided to give out 1,000 grants to micro entrepreneurs of up to $20,000. So, matter of fact, tomorrow I travel to Tobago for distribution, where we're going to give about 40 young entrepreneurs in Tobago this grant. And when I say young entrepreneurs, I don't mean just in terms of age. I mean, you're new entrepreneurs.
New entrepreneurs,
right?
yes.
So, and we've already given out about 200 plus in Trinidad, and we'll give out 1,000 every fiscal year, so that persons at the community level who are into micro business, the tailor, the hairdresser, they're creating employment also. So it's diversification, and we are giving the support. It's not a loan. They get that support, and they can buy their equipment and expand their business.
So I know we are cutting it close on time, and that's why I want to bring back in Chrisette on this conversation as well. You know, we know that the availability of Forex has been an age-old issue, and a serious pain point with many. But in terms of that diversification of the economy and where youth really come into play, do you think that there is enough being done?
There's definitely enough being done, especially through my DNS. I will always give kudos, because the first time I saw the grant city where they were giving out 1,000 grants, that was very impressive. And as I said earlier on, I think ministries really need to work on communication, ensuring that the information gets to the grassroots, because there are grants available, there are opportunities available, and my DNS was able to go into the communities and let young people be aware of what is available, and maybe other ministries need to take pattern to ensure that it reaches the people who can benefit from it. So most definitely, I was really happy today to hear about the growth in the non-energy sectors, and when it comes to education and ensuring that we are funding university programs that matches the fields in the non-energy sector, because what you would find that in the Joint Select Committee reports, as I mentioned before, there seems to be a mismatch in terms of what people are pursuing at the universities versus what is exactly needed for the further development in these job sectors. So that's my contribution there. But once again, kudos to the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service for supporting young people. And it all comes down to communication, ensuring those on the ground who probably may not be paying attention to the Parliament channel or probably may not be following the social media pages, but how exactly do you bridge that communication gap? I know citizens do have a responsibility to keep themselves informed, but you don't see that happening. So how exactly do we bridge that gap?
All right, so we do just have a few moments left. So I just want to get 30 seconds from each of you, and I'm going to start with Minister Cummings. If you have to say something to the people of Trinidad and Tobago right now based off of this budget in less than 30 seconds, what would you tell them about today's budget?
I would say that we are intent on doing more with less. We do have some circumstances. We wish we had more. It takes cash to care, but I think the Minister of Finance have put forward a very good budget, and we're going to do our best to bring the services to the people. We're going to do more with less.
All right, Mr. Parry.
Well, I mean, I look forward to see how some of these projects that were identified is going to be implemented going on. I mean, I've sat through 9 budgets in 9 years, and there is so much that still has not been done, things that were promised in PSIPs over the years. I am glad that the minister was not, how you put it, he was not loose in terms of spending. I think understanding the circumstances, He identified some key areas, a bit of electioneering, if we could talk about that at another time.
At another time, yes.
But
Not
definitely,
right
but definitely, I if Trinidad and Tobago succeeds, we all succeed.
Very
And
good.
I want these things to work. But again, as a loyal opposition, we'll continue to hold every minister, every ministry to account as we go forward to make sure that they deliver on the promises.
Right.
that they made. Thank you.
Riyadh, I'd like to bring you in now. Your final 30 seconds. What would you say to the people of Trinidad and Tobago given the budget that was
Hi.
presented today?
Hi, yes. Lastly, I would just like the private sector and the public sector, as well as the educating bodies, to constantly collaborate with each other so that we could feed Trinidad and Tobago and CARICOM safe and nutritious food consistently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Riyadh, Chrisette, your closing comments?
In general, and this is not any secret because, again, the assessment document I always reference recognizes that we need to strengthen monitoring and evaluation so we can continue to allocate money to these ministries. But if there's a gap in implementation, we would not get value for money. So I think we really need to strengthen that and continue to collaborate with civil society organizations to really get that work done. And Trinidad and Tobago pay attention to what is being offered. Get involved because there are numerous opportunities to grow yourself and to develop your communities.
All right. And Minister Gopi Skoon, your final thoughts.
I would commend the Minister of Finance on portraying the stewardship of our government for the last 10 years and in particular over the last year. I would ask the public to listen in to the further details given by ministers and to recognize the opportunities for participation in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much for that. So despite the challenges, we've seen the minister express his optimism. That is the Minister of Finance in his budget presentation earlier today, emphasizing that economic development cannot be viewed in isolation. And we have definitely heard that from the many voices heard this evening in our show Beyond the Numbers. So we would like to thank each of you that have been on with us this evening, and those of you viewing us at home as well, if you're listening to us as we continue to navigate the complex economic and social landscapes that aim to only explore that delicate balance between economic development and also the well-being of our citizens right here in Trinidad and Tobago. We do want to thank you so very much for joining us as we looked beyond the numbers, Budget 2025. And this was a budget deemed steadfast and resolute for forging pathways to prosperity. We thank you so very much for joining us. Be sure to keep it here on TTT as we bring you the latest at all times. That's a wrap on this evening's segment. I'm Seigonie Mohammed. Do have a great night.
It's savings and big discounts when you shop at Fens nationwide. Upgrade your home or treat yourself to something special. Enjoy store-wide savings on furniture, appliances, electronics, bedroom, and so much more when you shop at Fens of Marbella, Penal, and Wrightson Road, Port of Spain. Visit